The distress beacon had been running for 9 hours before anything answered it. Commander Rail stood in the sensor bay of station and watched the long-range display the way a man watches a wound that will not stop bleeding. The consensus siege fleet was 42 hours out. Devaris had 4 million people on it. The station had 1 functional gun battery, 3 docked warships with hull damage, and enough ammunition for a fight that would last about 11 minutes. The beacon was their last real option. Rail had sent it out on the galactic relief frequency, the old protocol, the one every spacefaring species agreed to honor in principle and ignored in practice unless it was convenient. He had asked for any allied fleet within jump range. He had specifically hoped for the Solhari Collective. The Solhari were good soldiers, calm, methodical. They planned 3 battles ahead and never wasted a ship. What the sensors found instead was something else entirely. The jump signature appeared at the system's edge, not 1 ship but 9. The energy readings were wrong, too hot, too loud. FTL arrivals were supposed to fade in like a slow exhale. These hit the system like someone had kicked a door open. Navigator This pulled up the identification profile and then stared at it for a long moment without speaking. "Commander," she said finally, "the transponder codes are human." Rail had never seen a human ship in person. Most species hadn't. Humanity had been a member of the Galactic Compact for about 60 years, young by any standard, and they mostly kept to their own cluster of space, expanding quietly, building things, occasionally showing up at trade conferences and saying very little. They had a reputation, not a fully understood one. The ships that came through were not quiet. The carrier at the center of the group was enormous, a flat, brutal thing with launch rails running along its entire ventral surface. The escort vessels around it were moving in a loose formation that looked almost casual until you noticed every gun was already oriented outward. Someone had gone to combat posture before they even knew where the enemy was. A transmission came through on the open channel. The voice that carried it was even, unhurried, and very direct. "Station Kira 9, this is Captain Dara Wells, USCC carrier Iron Tide. We picked up your relief beacon. We're here, talk to me." Rail opened the channel. He began the standard briefing format, identifying the enemy force, the timeline, the defensive situation, the casualty projections. He was 4 sentences in when Wells interrupted him. "What's the consensus made of?" Rail paused. "They are a machine collective, network drones. Do they have a central command unit, something that coordinates the fleet?" "They operate as a distributed network, no single command node. Destroying individual ships reduces their capacity but the network." "Can they adapt mid-battle, or do they run on preset combat algorithms?" Rail looked at Navigator This looked back at him with an expression that said she had no idea where this line of questioning was going either. "They recalculate before each engagement," Rail said. "They assess probability of success and do not commit to engagements below a certain. So they do math first." Wells said it like she was confirming something she already suspected, "and they haven't met anything that broke the math. In 600 years of recorded conflict, no opposing force has ever caused a full consensus retreat." There was a short silence on the channel, not long, maybe 4 seconds. "Noted," Wells said. "We're going to need your full tactical layout, every sensor reading you have on the approaching fleet, and access to the system's debris fields, particularly anything dense enough to run dark in." "Captain, I want to be clear about our situation. We have 3 damaged warships in." "I know, I read your beacon report on the way in. I'm not asking about your ships. I'm asking about the terrain." A brief pause. "Commander, when does the consensus fleet reach weapons range of Devaris?" 41 hours and 50 minutes at current speed." "Then we have time to work. Send us the data." Rail authorized the transfer. As the files moved, he walked to the observation port and looked out at the human carrier group. They were already repositioning, not holding at the system's edge the way Allied fleets usually did after a long jump. They were moving inward slowly, methodically, running their sensors over everything. One of the human escort ships passed close enough to the station that Rail could see the hull markings. There were tally marks scratched into the armor plating near the forward gun battery. He counted them before the ship moved out of view. He stopped counting at 40. Ambassador Sova appeared at his shoulder. The Nirath diplomat had been assigned to handle first contact protocols if any new species arrived. He had a tablet full of forms, greetings in 17 languages, and a carefully prepared speech about mutual cooperation. "Should I begin the formal introduction sequence?" Sova asked. Rail watched the human ships spread out across the system's approach corridor like they were measuring it for something. "I don't think they need an introduction," he said. Down on the carrier, he could just barely see figures moving along the outer launch deck, suited crew running through flight checks, small and quick against the vast hull. Even from this distance, something about the way they moved was different. Not panicked, not cautious. They looked, Rail thought, like they were eager. He was not sure yet if that was good or very bad. He thought about the consensus fleet, still hours out, running its pre-battle calculations with perfect machine confidence. He thought about the tally marks on the escort ship's hull. He went back to his console and started pulling up the debris field charts. Ambassador Sova had prepared for first contact his entire diplomatic career. He had studied 17 alien languages. He had memorized the greeting protocols of 42 species. He had a speech ready, warm, formal, appropriately humble, that acknowledged humanity's youth as a spacefaring civilization while expressing genuine gratitude for their response. He had practiced it in the mirror. None of it was useful. When the shuttle from Station Kira 9 docked with the Iron Tide, the first thing Sova encountered was noise. Not alarms, music. Something fast and rhythmic pumping through the hangar bay speakers at a volume that made his secondary hearing membranes vibrate. 2 human crew members were arm wrestling on a crate near a parked fighter. A third was eating something directly out of a metal tin with a tool that was clearly not designed for eating. A fourth was sliding down the side of a maintenance ladder because, apparently, walking down it was too slow. Sova stood in the hangar doorway and felt his prepared speech dissolve. Commander Rail had warned him, not in direct words, but in the flat expression he wore when he sent Sova across. A crew member spotted them and jogged over. Young, quick eyes. "Ambassador, Captain Wells is in the war room, I'll take you up." The war room was different from the hangar, quieter, focused. 6 humans standing around a 3-dimensional tactical display, talking fast, pointing at things, occasionally disagreeing with each other loudly before reaching some kind of conclusion and moving on. Captain Wells stood at the center of it. She was not the largest person in the room. She did not raise her voice above anyone else. But when she said something, people stopped talking and listened. Sova delivered his greeting. He got 3 sentences out before Wells said, "Good to meet you," in a tone that meant she had received the information and filed it and was ready for the next thing. She gestured him toward the tactical display. "Tell me how the consensus fights, not the technical specs. Rail's files have those. Tell me how they think." Sova had studied the consensus for 9 years. He explained it carefully. The machine collective had no ego, no emotion, no concept of honor or pride. Every decision was mathematical. Before any engagement, the network ran probability calculations across thousands of variables, their fleet strength, the enemy's fleet strength, terrain, supply lines, damage tolerance, and returned a single output. If the probability of acceptable victory crossed a certain threshold, they attacked. If it did not, they withdrew and waited for conditions to improve. "They've never lost a war," Sova said, "because they never fight one they can't win." He watched Wells process this. She did not look impressed. She looked thoughtful, the way someone looks when they're picking apart a lock. "So they're not brave," she said. They're accurate. Bravery is irrelevant to them. They simply, what threshold do they use? What's the cutoff probability below which they stop attacking? Sova checked his records. Analysis of 600 years of consensus engagements suggests a threshold of approximately 62%. Below that, they have never initiated an offensive action. Wells turned to a crew member, Boone. The big human at the far end of the table looked up from a paper covered in handwritten notes. He had a calmness about him that seemed inconsistent with the handwriting, which was violently messy. "Sir." "You heard that?" "Yes, sir." "Thoughts?" Sergeant Boone looked at the tactical display for a moment. Then he looked at Sova with an expression that was not unkind, just very direct. "The machines have never fought anyone crazy enough to make the math not work." Sova opened his mouth. "Closed it." Boone went back to his notes. Wells pulled up the tactical map, the approach corridor, the dead belt debris field, the consensus fleet's projected route. She started placing markers. As Sova watched her plan take shape, he felt the temperature in his secondary circulatory system drop by several degrees. "Captain," he said carefully, "that positioning puts your ships directly in the consensus fleet's primary weapons range with no retreat vector." "I know. If your calculations are wrong, then we'll be wrong loudly, and the consensus will have to stop and process that, which buys Devaris time either way." She looked at him. "What's your estimate of consensus response time to a completely unexpected threat vector?" Sova stared at her. "Their network requires a minimum of 8 to 12 minutes to run new probability calculations when original parameters are significantly altered. So if we hit them with something they've never seen before, they spend 12 minutes doing math instead of shooting." Wells nodded slowly. 12 minutes is a lot." Sova wanted to ask what 12 minutes of time was worth against a fleet that size. He looked at Boone instead, who had finished writing something and was now quietly checking the charge on a weapon that Sova was not familiar with and which appeared to have been modified extensively from its original design. "Sergeant," Sova said, "are you not concerned about the probability of—" "Probability," Boone said pleasantly, "is what happens when nothing interesting is going on." The station shuddered. Somewhere deep in Kira 9's structure, a distant consensus probe strike had clipped the outer ring. Rail's voice came through the comm channel a second later, steady and tired. "They've sent an advance scout. One ship, testing our response." Wells looked at Sova. "That your formal introduction moment?" She was already moving toward the command deck before he answered. Sova stood in the war room alone for a moment, surrounded by half-finished tactical notes and the smell of whatever the crew member had been eating from the tin, and tried to remember the last time any of his diplomatic training had felt relevant. He could not. He followed the captain. There is a kind of silence that only happens in deep space, inside a ship running with every system that produces a signal turned completely off. No engine hum, no active sensors pinging the dark, no heat venting through the radiator fins. The crew breathes slow and quiet, and the ship floats in the debris field like a dead thing, cold metal among cold rock, invisible to anything that searches by emission rather than by eye. The alien crew members assigned as liaison officers aboard the Iron Tides, 3 escort ships were not prepared for this silence. On the Velthari frigate Pale Shore, which was parked deep inside the dead belt's densest debris cluster, running the same dark protocol, liaison officer Ven had stopped filing reports after the 3rd hour because her hands were shaking too much to type accurately. Not from fear of the consensus, from the humans. They were completely still. 22 crew members in the forward section of the ship, in near total darkness, eating cold rations and waiting. No talking, no movement except necessary. 2 of them were asleep, actually asleep, She had checked while parked in a debris field 40 minutes from a machine fleet that could kill every living thing on this ship in under 30 seconds. A third one was reading something on a dim handheld screen. The light was so low she could barely see the page. Ven had been a soldier for 11 years. She had held difficult positions before, but there was a quality to the human waiting that she did not have a word for in her language. They were not suppressing anxiety. They were genuinely comfortable. It unsettled her more than the consensus ever had. The probe fleet came in at hour 6. 14 consensus scout ships, running active sensors, sweeping the debris field in a standard grid pattern. The machine network had dispatched them to verify the approach corridor before the main siege fleet committed to its final advance on Devaris. It was a precaution. The algorithm had calculated a 94.7% probability that no meaningful threat was present in this region. The calculation was based on the known capabilities of the forces at Station Kira 9. It did not include the humans, because the humans were not in any of the consensus's historical data banks. The probe fleet moved into the belt. Wells's voice came over the comm channel, low and even. One word. Now. Ven had reviewed the plan 4 times. She understood it intellectually. Seeing it happen was different. The human ships came alive in sequence, power on, engines hot, weapons locked in less than 3 seconds. 3 seconds from dead silence to full combat readiness. The escort ships moved before she had fully processed that the order had been given. They came out of the debris from 3 separate vectors. Not in a line, not in a formation the consensus's tactical algorithms would have a prepared response for, but from angles that forced the probe fleet to split its fire across completely separate threat assessments. The Iron Tide came out last and hit first. Its main rail batteries fired before it had fully cleared the debris shadow. The first consensus ship came apart before the machine network registered the Iron Tide as a present threat. By the time the registration was complete, 3 more were gone. The probe fleet tried to respond. Some of them managed it, return fire, shields up, drive cores lighting up to generate spacing. It helped some of them live for an additional 30 seconds. What Ven had not understood from the briefings was the speed. She had been in engagements before. There was always a rhythm to them: fire, assess, adjust, fire again. Military engagements had tempo, and experienced crews learned to read that tempo and move within it. The humans did not operate in that rhythm. They fired continuously, adjusted continuously, moved without stopping to assess. The ship shook around her from recoil and counterfire and debris strike, and the crew ran their stations like they had trained for this particular chaos, specifically, for years. She heard Boone's team in the forward gun bay calling targets to each other in clipped shorthand she barely understood, and she realized they were competing, genuinely competing with each other for confirmed kills, keeping score, and one of them was laughing. Laughing. The last consensus probe ship tried to run. It got 800 kilometers before an escort ship ran it down and finished it. Total engagement time: 7 minutes and 40 seconds. The dead belt went quiet again. Ven sat in her station chair and looked at her sensor screen. 14 consensus ships, 0 survivors. 0 consensus transmissions had gotten out. The jamming package the humans deployed in the first second of the engagement had seen to that. The machine fleet didn't know yet. Wells's voice returned on the channel. "Ven, you good over there?" Ven looked around the ship. Human crew were already cycling down from combat posture, a few of them rolling their shoulders, one getting water, one making a note in a small book. Boone appeared in the doorway to the gun bay, checking something on his wrist unit. He noticed her expression and gave a small, easy shrug. "First time in the belt?" he asked. She did not answer immediately. "Consensus has never lost a patrol fleet with 0 survivors," she said, "in 600 years." Boone considered this. "Well," he said, "they lost one now." He went back to his notes. The human crew around her returned to their quiet routines, easy and unbothered in the dark of the debris field, while somewhere out beyond the belt, a machine fleet sailed toward Devaris with no idea that its eyes had just gone out. The consensus stopped moving. Not a retreat, not a repositioning. The entire siege fleet simply decelerated to station-keeping speed and held position at the outer edge of the Devaris system. And for 6 hours it did nothing at all. Rael had been monitoring consensus fleet behavior for 3 years. He had studied 6 centuries of their recorded military history. He had never seen this. Nobody had. He called Wells on the secure channel. "They've halted." "I know," she said. "They're thinking." Machine collectives don't. They do when something breaks the model. There was a sound in the background, someone on the iron tide shouting something, then laughter, then quiet again. "We cracked their comms, by the way. My linguistics team and the ship AI finished the translation key about an hour ago. You should look at what they're sending each other." Rael transferred the data to his display and read it with Navigator the S leaning over his shoulder, translating the denser sections in a low voice. The consensus was arguing. Not in the way biological beings argued, not emotionally, not with egos involved. But the machine network was running competing probability models, and the outputs were contradicting each other, and different nodes of the network were weighting the variables differently. And the collective that had never needed more than 4 minutes to reach a tactical consensus was now, 6 hours later, still unresolved. The core problem, as far as Rael could decode it, was that the humans did not fit. Every variable the consensus plugged into its models, ship class, crew size, armament ratings, species combat history, produced probability outputs that the network could work with. But the probe fleet's destruction had generated behavioral data that did not match any of those inputs. The consensus ships had been destroyed too fast, from too many angles, with what the network's damage assessments described as operationally uncharacteristic aggression relative to force size. In short, things that small should not fight like that. Rael set down the transcript and stared at his console for a long moment. He opened the channel to Wells. "May I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Why do your people fight this way? The risk acceptance, the comfort with bad odds." He paused. "We have species in this coalition who have been soldiers for 1,000 years, and none of them, not one, operates the way your crew does." The channel was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone choosing not to answer. The quiet of someone deciding how to answer honestly. "You know what Earth's surface gravity is," Wells said. "Yes, it is high by galactic standards. We evolved on a planet where the gravity is high. The weather tries to kill you at least 3 months a year, and roughly a third of the animal life on land can either outrun you, outmuscle you, or poison you. We didn't have armor or claws or venom. We had endurance and pattern recognition and the ability to work in groups. And even with all that, for most of our history, not making it to old age was a normal outcome. You got sick, you got eaten, you starved, you froze. Every generation that survived did so by taking risks when it was necessary, because playing it safe just meant dying slower." Rael said nothing. He was aware that this S had stopped typing. "We've been a spacefaring species for about 300 years, Wells continued. "Comfortable for maybe half that, but 300 years is nothing. The thing that kept us alive before that is still in us. It doesn't go away because you build a heated building and a reliable food supply." A short pause. Boone grew up in a city. He's never had to hunt anything or survive a winter without shelter. But when you put him in a bad situation, something turns on that is very old and not interested in probability calculations. Rael looked at the consensus transmission data again. The machine fleet, still frozen in position, still running its models. "You said something turns on," he said. "Is it controllable?" "By the individual, usually, in aggregate across an entire species," a sound that might have been a quiet laugh. I honestly don't know. Rail recorded the conversation in his personal log and marked it for inclusion in his official report. He would have a great deal of difficulty summarizing it for the Coalition Council, but he would try. On the edge of the Devaris system, the consensus had now been stationary for 7 hours and 40 minutes. It had never taken this long before. Rail had checked the records twice to be certain. Wells's voice came back, different in tone now, focused, practical. Rail, I need to talk to you about Boone. What about him? He's put together a ground insertion team. 8 people. They've been running rehearsal drills in the cargo bay for the last 5 hours. Rail checked his station manifest. The Devaris planetary defense grid, disabled by the consensus in the war's first week, was still physically intact on the surface. Disabling it remotely had been a precision operation. Restoring it would require someone to reach the primary relay station in person. Nobody had suggested this was possible. Nobody had tried it. The consensus surface interdiction drones would make the approach almost certainly fatal. Nobody ordered that, Rail said. No, Wells agreed. They just started doing it. Rail absorbed this information. He looked at the frozen consensus fleet on his display, then at the data showing the colony world behind it, 4 million people waiting. Can they reach the relay station? Boone thinks so. I've looked at his route. A pause. I think so too. Rail sat with that for a long time. Tell him, Rail said finally, to be ready when we move. 8 people dropped toward a hostile planet in a shuttle with the heat shield running so hot the edges glowed orange, and not one of them spoke for the last 4 minutes of descent. Boone watched the altimeter and kept one hand loose on the door release. Outside, the sky above Devaris went from black to deep red to orange as they hit atmosphere. 2 consensus interdiction drones had already picked them up on entry. He could see the intercept trails on the small screen bolted to the bulkhead. They were fast. The shuttle was faster barely, and the pilot was flying a descent curve that was steep enough to make Boone's stomach climb up toward his teeth. He did not mention his stomach. The team was watching him. 90 seconds, the pilot said. Boone did the math on the drones again. They would intercept about 30 seconds after landing. 30 seconds was enough. It would have to be. He thought about the relay station, 3 kilometers from the landing point across open lowland terrain. The consensus had disabled it remotely by burning out 2 specific junction nodes at the main power coupling. Venn had given him the technical specs from the Coalition's original construction records. 2 replacement nodes, both in his pack. Plug them in, run the restart sequence, done. Simple on paper. The planet between here and the relay station had 60,000 square kilometers of consensus surface drones patrolling it. 30 seconds. The shuttle hit the ground hard enough that 2 people grabbed overhead straps to stay in their seats. Boone was already at the door. They moved in a line across the flat terrain, fast and low, using the shallow drainage cuts in the ground as cover. Boone had studied every centimeter of this approach for 5 hours. He knew where the drone patrol paths were. He knew the gap windows. He ran toward the gaps with his team behind him and did not let himself think about the margin. Above the planet, the plan was running. Wells had split the fleet. The louder half ran active sensors and broadcast power signatures, visible enough to register as a credible threat. The consensus, still recalculating, shifted its probability resources toward modeling a frontal engagement. The other half had gone dark and cold. Rail watched both tracks from Kira 9's sensor bay and understood what he was seeing. Wells was not trying to defeat the consensus fleet. She was occupying its attention. Venn's voice came through from one of the dark ships. Visible group is drawing their targeting solutions. Consensus fleet has moved to elevated readiness posture. And the dark group, Rail asked. 40 minutes from the flank. Rail pulled up the planetside feed. No word from Boone yet. He ran the math for the 6th time and got the same answer he always got. The timing required everything to go right simultaneously. The ground team had to reach the relay station. The dark fleet had to reach the flank position. The visible fleet had to keep the consensus occupied long enough for both of those things to happen. If any one element failed, the others probably failed too. On Devaris' surface, Boone reached the relay station with 1 minute to spare on the drone window. The building was intact. The consensus had no reason to destroy what it had simply switched off. He had the access panel open in 40 seconds. The junction nodes were exactly where Ven's schematic said they would be. He pulled the burned ones and slotted the replacements and ran the restart sequence from memory. The system took 11 seconds to boot. Above the planet, the consensus fleet had been watching the visible human ships for 30 minutes, and its probability model had finally reached a decision. The threat was credible, the odds remained favorable for the machine fleet, an attack was probable. Targeting solutions finalized. Fire control systems enabled. The planetary defense grid came online. It did not come online quietly. 400 surface-to-orbit gun emplacements scattered across Devaris activated simultaneously, and every one of them had been targeting locked on the consensus siege fleet since before the war started. The original defense plan, never cleared, still loaded. The first salvo hit the consensus fleet before any ship in that fleet had been issued a command to maneuver. At the same moment, the Dark Fleet dropped its emissions blackout at point-blank range on the siege line's exposed flank and opened fire. At the same moment, the visible fleet accelerated. The consensus probability engine received 3 simultaneous threat inputs from 3 directions it had not modeled and needed a minimum of 8 minutes to recalculate. It did not have 8 minutes. Rail watched the machine fleet's formation come apart on his display, not destroyed, not entirely, but broken. Individual ships maneuvering independently because the network consensus was fractured, and each node was running its own survival calculation. Broken formations were manageable formations. Wells's ships punched through them like they had rehearsed exactly this. The retreat order came through the decrypted consensus channel, 22 minutes after the grid came online. Rail read it twice. The first consensus retreat in 600 years of recorded history was 11 words in machine code that translated, stripped of all technical language, to "This is no longer a winnable engagement, withdraw." Ven's voice came through, very quiet. "They're running." On the surface of Devaris, Boone sat on the relay station floor and watched a drone alert on his handheld screen. The interdiction drone arrived 34 seconds after he finished the restart sequence. It hovered outside for a long moment, searching, processing, confused by the sudden shift in strategic parameters. Then it turned and flew away. He put his empty ration wrapper in his pocket and started the walk back to the extraction point. 3 days after the siege broke, Ambassador Sova sat in a temporary office on station and tried to write a formal commendation for the human forces. He had been trying for most of the morning. The problem was not finding good things to say. The problem was that every time he started a sentence, he got to a point where accurate description stopped sounding like a commendation and started sounding like a warning. He had drafted 6 versions. The 7th began. The human expeditionary force demonstrated tactical creativity and a relationship with personal risk that this office cannot adequately. He deleted it. Rail found him there an hour later and sat across from him without being invited, which had stopped bothering Sova after the 2nd day of working with humans, because that was just how they entered rooms. "How is the report going?" Rail asked. "I've written 7 introductions." "Send them all, let the council pick." Sova looked at him. Rail looked older than he had a week ago. Not worse, just changed, the way things change when something large moves through them. He had filed his own official report to the Coalition Council the previous evening. Sova had been given a copy. It was the most direct military document he had ever read. The final line read, "Do not send distress signals lightly. You may not get who you expected. You may get something better." Rail pulled up his datapad. "The ceremony is in 2 hours. Ven tells me the human crew is actually planning to attend in clean uniforms. That is encouraging. She also says Boone has prepared some remarks." Sova set down his stylus. "Why?" "Nobody asked him to, he just did." Sova thought about this. "Should we be concerned?" "I've stopped asking that question." The ceremony was held in Kira 9's main bay, the largest intact space on the station. The coalition had strung its formal banners. The lighting was ceremonial, soft, and even. Rail stood at the front with the senior coalition officers. The human crew came in on time mostly, in clean uniforms, standing straight, which Ven had clearly achieved by asking them firmly several times. Wells stood at the front of her group with Boone one step behind her. Sova delivered the formal address. It was shorter than planned. He had cut 4 sections after spending 3 days with these people, and it said what needed to be said. The coalition owed them a debt. The consensus had broken. Devaris was safe, and the manner of that safety was something the recorded history of this region of space would note for a very long time. Wells accepted the coalition's formal thanks in about 30 words, which was efficient even by human standards. Then Boone stepped forward. He looked at the assembled alien officers and crew members, all watching him with varying degrees of wariness, and he said, "I just want to say that this is the first time I've ever been to a party in space, and I think that's going to be hard to beat." There was a silence. Then Wells laughed, a short, genuine sound. Then 3 human crew members laughed. The silence continued from the alien side for another moment, and then something happened that Sova would describe in his personal notes as genuinely difficult to explain. The laughter from the humans was not mocking. It was not at anyone's expense. It was just warm, real, and something about the realness of it crossed whatever gap of biology and language and history existed in that room. Ven made a sound that was her species' equivalent of a suppressed laugh. 2 of the Velthari junior officers exchanged a look. And then Commander Rail, who had filed more somber official reports in the last week than in any year of his career, made a sound that was low and resonant, and was, Sova was almost certain, the closest Velthari biology could come to what the humans were doing. The tension in the room went somewhere else. Wells stayed 2 more hours, long enough to complete the formal mutual documentation, shake hands with Rail in the human way, which he had practiced, Sova noticed, and brief the coalition on the human fleet's next tasking. They were being reassigned. Other sectors had need. Rail walked with her to the docking bay. "The consensus will come back," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Wells said, "probably not soon. They'll rebuild their probability models first, try to account for us." She glanced at him. "They won't fully manage it." "Why not?" "Because the variable they can't model isn't our ships or our weapons. It's the fact that we actually don't mind bad odds." She said it without pride, just as a fact. That's hard to put a number on. Rail stood at the bay window and watched the iron tide detach from the station. The carrier group moved outward with the same casual, unstoppable energy it had arrived with, loud FTL spooling up, ships repositioning into formation, no particular effort at quiet. They hit jump at the edge of the system and were gone. The sensor bay still showed a faint residual signature, a broad smear of excited particles that would take 3 days to fully dissipate. Rail went back to his console and opened his report file. He found the final line he had written, read it once more, and decided it was sufficient. Behind him, Navigator this S was updating the station's species contact database. He heard her pause. "Commander, under the human profile, primary tactical notes. What should I write?" Rail looked at the empty space, where the iron tide had been. Right, do not assume they won't. This S typed it, the database saved. On Devaris below, 4 million people who did not know what had happened above them went about their lives in the pale morning light of a system that was, against all probability, still theirs.